So we became aware of this accommodation in January, and mothers were moved in, I think, around the 20th of January. And there were about 20 mothers that were moved in, mothers in the asylum process, accommodations in communities where they had strong links and supportive networks. Mothers were told that they would be moved to a one-bedroom flat in a community where there were plenty of other mothers. But as it transpired, they were moved into one-room bedsits in a very institutional style accommodation. And this was done on a very no-choice basis with a lot of intimidation and threats around, whether if they refused to move, what would happen. They were told they could only bring two bags, and to leave the rest of their belongings at home. So it all came about very abruptly.
Yep. And just to add to that as well, that the unit that the mothers have been put in was originally actually a unit that was used by the James Shield Project, which supported living accommodation for young people who were either experiencing or at risk of homelessness. The project was actually closed down when Glasgow City Council removed its funding, describing the accommodation as being outdated and no longer providing suitable accommodation. And it's now, without the sizes of the rooms being changed, has been opened back up to accommodate mums and their babies.
Relating to your campaign called Freedom to Crawl, you say that the institutional setting that houses people, it denies asylum seekers the stability, privacy, and sense of safety they need to rebuild their lives. So that probably seems obvious, but could you just develop that a little bit? How exactly do conditions like this prevent people from living the lives that they need to live?
Lots of reasons why this stops people from being able to live a life of dignity. First of all, just to say that the right to a home is a fundamental right that should be to all of us, and it's not just the right to any home, it should be a right to a home that's of a safe and suitable standard. A couple of things that we are really sort of outraged by and are highlighting within the campaign is the safety hazards that has to babies and curious toddlers that are moving around the room. So there's literally no other space apart from a cot to safely leave a baby unattended, not even just for a moment to turn away. There's just too many safety hazards in the room. So there's things such as no protection from the unit's cooker, which cots in a lot of the rooms are actually right next to. And also because, as Amanda had said, it's such a close quarter, and although they've only been told to bring 2 bags of belongings, it's still such a tight unit that there's not much space to be able to actually store belongings. So often clothes and belongings are sprawled throughout the room, which again is a safety hazard for a young baby or a toddler to be able to move around. And again, it goes back to what we're saying, is that children and babies should have freedom to crawl. Another issue is that the fact that there's nothing to hold on to in the shower. So it means that new mums, who are maybe feeling weak after giving birth, and this is especially true for mums who have just had a C-section, are having to avoid washing altogether for a couple of weeks because they can't hold themselves up in the shower. And on top of that, there is nowhere to conveniently bathe a baby because the showers are just too small to fit a baby bath. And to further that even more, the entire community of 20 plus women plus their children have to share just 4 washing machines, one of which is usually broken. And at the moment there's 2, so there's 2 washing machines for 20 women and their babies. And it means that clothes that require frequent washing because it's young children are sometimes having to go days and days before they can be washed. I think Amanda, who is working directly with the women, can kind of speak to some of the actual impacts that are having on the women as well because of all of this.
Great, yeah, that'd be great, Amanda.
Yeah, I think, as Megan says, we work with many of the women who are living in the unit. And I think, unfortunately, in the time, since having moved in, we've seen a really notable impact on both the women's mental health and physical well-being, but also their babies' well-being. It is a short space of time, I suppose, to really start thinking about how this is impacting babies in the long term. But we can already see things like babies who are, becoming very, very clingy with their mothers because they're not having the opportunity to safely kind of venture away from their mothers in the ways that we would expect babies of this age to do. Babies at this age, you know, it's an important part of their development to be able to go away from their mother, explore something, and then come back to the security of their mother. But without that freedom to be able to do that, we're seeing this almost like an attachment issue that's starting to form with some of these babies. So the impact is severe, and I think we're also seeing you know, babies who are unable to fall into any kind of healthy sleep pattern because, again, there's no privacy, there's no way for a baby to sort of have its own routine and to be separate from its mother within those rooms. So that is also really detrimental.
Okay, good. And apart from the campaign that you guys are running, is anything being done about this at a government level to move it on or to put pressure on Mears to do more? Maybe, yeah, Megan, you can take that.
So asylum accommodation and immigration is actually not devolved within the Scottish government. So it is a sort of matter that's reserved to Westminster. And at the moment, there hasn't been much sort of movement that has been done, although there has been widespread condemnation across the third sector and across some politicians as well, including a recent debate that was actually held in Westminster around asylum accommodation, where a local MP, Anne McLaughlin in Glasgow, actually spoke up and spoke about how detrimental and not fit for purpose this unit was. So there has been widespread condemnation, although there's not been a lot of movement on the actual quality of the accommodation that the mums and babies are experiencing.
Okay, all right. And have the Home Office been contacted about it? Are they likely to put pressure on Mears to do something?
Yeah, so the Home Office have been contacted for a comment when we released our press release. We don't know the full quote that they have given, but they have said that this is a purpose-designed unit, as have Mears. Our challenge back to that is, although it has been painted and refurbished since it was closed down as the former James Shield project, the size of the rooms has not changed, and so the suitability of it being used as housing has not changed.
Okay, and who are these guys, Mears, and how do they get to be in charge of such accommodation? That could go to either of you.
Do you want to take this, Amanda? I feel like I'm okay. So Mears are, so the Home Office, although they are the ones that provide accommodation for asylum seekers, they actually contract that out to various different companies. So if you're aware with issues in Glasgow, you might have heard of campaigning that's happened over the previous years around another private company that was contracted out by the Home Office to provide housing for asylum seekers and refugees, and that was formerly a company called Serco. And there was a lot of issues about lock changes that were happening very, as Amanda said, very abruptly, very suddenly, that were putting asylum seekers and refugees in our communities at risk of total destitution. So Serco has been replaced by Mears, who is a private company who does provide housing, not just within the asylum sector, but within social housing as well across the UK. And so they've won the contract to be able to provide asylum accommodation for the Home Office.
Okay, so this is another private enterprise looking after accommodation who may or may not primarily have the needs and the welfare of asylum seekers at heart. Okay, so maybe we can just wrap up by talking about what it is that you guys are proposing. I know you have the Freedom to Crawl campaign, but if there's anything else you'd like to add, or what it is you'd like to see done from here on out. I know you've got a short-term, medium-term and long-term plan, so maybe you can just develop that a little bit for both yourself, Megan, and Amanda.
Are four key and quite immediate asks that we have of Mears and the Home Office. So the first thing that we're calling for is for Mears to immediately commit in writing to implementing vulnerability assessments for the women and children that are being moved into the accommodation or have already been moved into the accommodation. But rather than being conducted by Mears themselves, we want it to be conducted by a family support specialist agency. And we also want them to conduct children's rights impact assessments, which has that accountability and transparency into the actual impact that it would have on children being kept in institutional style accommodation. But really, we do want them to commit to not moving any more women or anyone else in the wider asylum network into the accommodation. It doesn't matter who's in that accommodation, it is not fit for purpose. The third thing that we're looking for is we want them to commit to move we want to, to commit to moving all the women out of the accommodation and either back into or into the communities in and around Glasgow, and be given the right support to do so. And lastly, we're looking for something called an equality and impact assessment. And again, it all goes back to that transparency and accountability for why the unit was opened in the first place. So it's basically conducting an assessment to basically show that transparency around why the policy decision was made to open the unit, and then to keep the unit despite the condemnation by various actors within housing and the asylum networks. And obviously the overarching theme is we fundamentally object to institutional style accommodation, regardless of who it is that is experiencing it. So we want to end the use of institutional accommodation. And Amanda, is there anything you'd like to add in kind of in between that?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily something that we've specifically outlined within the campaign, but I think we would really encourage certain people within, Glasgow City Council and the Health and Social Care Board to really take a look at this unit and to make sure that they've been fully engaged. I think the response that we're hearing from Mears at the moment is that they very much have the support of Glasgow City Council, which may well be true, but the question for me is, have the right people been engaged as part of that process? People who really understand, perinatal infant mental health and mothers' well-being.